he came on this podcast and then got a girlfriend, so...
Oh, wake up, rethink the status quo. When you get your money right, then you're the one who runs your life. Come build a wealthy spirit with Sammie and Michelle.
Whew, it is bittersweet, but Sammie and I are here for the last episode of the Build a Wealthy Spirit podcast. We are so proud of this podcast. We are so grateful to all of you who have been on this journey with us. And today we're going to reflect, celebrate, and say our final goodbyes.
You guys, this is the last podcast ever of the Build a Wealthy Spirit podcast, which is crazy to think about because Michelle and I have been doing this for 4 years?
4 years.
4 years. And we have learned so much by doing the podcast. Honestly, these episodes, creating them, curating them, has taught me so much and impacted my life so much personally. So I'm excited to have this final episode and talk to you all today.
Yes, and we're going to talk about the greater impact and memories, but I could never have imagined, Sammie, 4 years ago when we started this podcast, how many unexpected seasons of our life this would capture. From moving in with my parents, that was literally when we started this podcast. A year later, moving to a small town in the middle of nowhere. A year and a half later, moving to our current home, finally being in a city again. I had left my job at the beginning of this podcast, started freelancing. We went to podcasts, we spoke at Camp Pie. Sammie leaving her PA job, going on to a sabbatical. So many crazy things. It's been such a ride. And a huge perk of having a podcast is we record it weekly throughout, and we have a record of all these changes. And we have also heard from all of you and the changes you have made, which has been so meaningful to us and really drove us every single week to keep showing up.
Let's get into it.
I am so excited for the next chapter of what I'm doing, Sammie. I, Michelle, am launching writing coaching. I'm working with 6 students right now. It's been so fulfilling, so fun to be able to read their drafts, give feedback, jam on ideas, talk about distribution. And so if this is something that you're doing or publishing online, you're looking for a group, accountability, those type of things, look in our show notes and feel free to sign up to partner with me.
So back to today's topic. We're ending the Build a Wealthy Spirit podcast.
Sammie, I think the first question we should answer is why we're ending the podcast. For me, the reason is pretty simple. We've been podcasting weekly for the last 4 years, and I know I've gotten so much out of this experience. We've heard from so many of you who've started budgeting, started saving money, investing, taking sabbaticals, who have made major changes in your own life. And many of you have shared how different episodes we've shared have had a big impact on your life. At this point, we're very satisfied with the deep dives we've done on the topics that were exciting to us, and we feel fulfilled and ready to close this chapter of our lives.
It's true, Michelle. I think we have truly covered everything we've wanted to cover on these topics. When I look at it, I'm like, I can't think of anything more I would genuinely add. Financial independence, sabbaticals, the spiritual journey, the mindset. I think we've captured everything on that journey. I think that's probably why both of us have now left our W-2 jobs and are now exploring things using our financial freedom, because we were living out what the podcast was saying while it was happening. And now we feel it's time to close this chapter.
It's so true, Sammie. There are so many things that have made this journey worthwhile. One of the biggest, and something that Sammie and I have talked about many times throughout the 4 years, is the impact on the community. If any of you are thinking about sharing your thoughts online, writing, making videos, any of those things, I encourage you to think about the people in your community, people who are 1, 2, 3 degrees away from you. Sometimes it's hard. You can't just pontificate to every single person. and figure out easily who is interested in the same topics, who is interested in personal growth the same way. And yet, having a podcast was a beautiful way for us to be a lighthouse for people who are interested in similar things and motivated to start growing the same way that we were.
Michelle, I remember when we started the podcast, we would often reference a quote by Oprah about how she always kept her main focus, her North Star, the goal of what she wanted from her show in every single episode. And she didn't try to detract from that just for the sake of making the story more interesting or more clickbaitable, though there probably wasn't clickbait when she was doing that. And I think we have also held on to that. I think we always reiterated our intention and our goal before every single episode. And I think that's why there's consistency. And I think that's why the message is powerful. I feel very solid about the podcast we put out and its intention. I don't feel any ill will. It's truly what we found and what we were exploring to progress on this journey of life.
Yes, the intention of every episode has always been so important to us. Thinking about what is it that the person on the other side, listening with their headphones, listening when it pops up in their car unexpectedly, what sort of message are we hoping that they can take away and maybe do something genuinely productive with the information that we share? So for all of you who have told us, who have shared with us your journey, who have made different changes in your personal finances, in your sabbatical, who have taken the quizzes, the 4 tendency quiz, Sparketype quiz, values quiz, and sent us your results and told us how it helped with your relationships, that helped us realize that our intentions were reaching you. And it honestly helped us as well, because talking about these type of things week over week over week, we've all both grown so much. And I think it's because we chose the topic and theme that was all about growing.
Now, memorable moments from the podcast. A big one was having Joe Saul-Sehy from Stacking Benjamins and Doc G from the Earn and Invest podcast as mentors. They helped shift our podcast so much, just make us better storytellers, make us better creatives as far as putting the podcast together. They also gave us amazing opportunities like getting to go to PodFest and be with them in person. They're also just wonderful people in person who literally are so generous with their help and with their advice. They are really there to better other people's lives. And it was awesome to meet them through this podcast.
Yes. Picture this. Sammie and I were living in the middle of nowhere in a desert. We decided we would drive 3.5 hours to see Joe Saul-Sehy's Stacked Book Tour. Probably the only people who drove to Vegas for that purpose and not something more nefarious.
What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. And that is us going to Barnes & Noble's to see Joe Saul-Sehy for his Stacked Book Tour.
And we had that moment where he signed our book and we got to say hey, we have a podcast. And I remember in that moment, Joe was so generous and told us to email him that he would give us some feedback, which we did, he did. And then a few months later, him and Jordan in their newsletter said that they were looking for podcast mentees. And Sammie and I were like, hey, remember us from Las Vegas? Which that was probably one of the first moments, Sammie, that I really appreciated how putting work out there, publishing your things, driving 3 hours in the desert just to see somebody and say hello can really impact your life in a way that you cannot imagine.
And because of them, we also got to speak at Camp Phi. Thank you, Stephen, for giving us that opportunity. Camp Phi, getting to speak was one thing, but just being there, I highly recommend every single person, especially if you're interested in financial independence in any manner, go to Camp Phi, because you are with the most knowledgeable and also most humble people who are so intentional about their lives. These people are not here to brag or to show off or to try to win approval. They are so intentional about what they want from their lives, and they are so willing to share what they've done to get there.
Camp FI, Sammie and I both agree, was a highlight of 2024 for us. Meeting those people who are so excited and interested in personal finance and just love to nerd out, and also love karaoke and being in a camp-like setting, eating breakfast together, all of our meals together was so fun. And it made me realize that when you're looking online, you're reading different content from personal finance people. I think in the 4 years that we've been doing this, there's been a lot of like, I retired early and my life sucks horror stories. And so you're like, oh my gosh, is this like the most stressful thing in the world? And it's funny because Sammie and I have both taken sabbaticals. We know that's not the truth. And when you go to Camp FI, you realize that there's just all of these wonderful, chill people who are either on the path to FI or have achieved early retirement. And they're so humble and they just, go on cruises all the time, or they hang out with their family, or they continue working because they like their job. There's like so many different versions of these people. And if you're listening from Camp FI, shout out. We love you guys. And if you're thinking about going, we highly, 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 highly recommend it.
Now, Michelle, let's talk about episodes of the podcast. As far as favorite episodes, I have to say, as a personal finance nerd, any podcast episode that involved FIRE, tracking our spending, calculating your numbers, that's like my favorite thing ever.
Sammie, I know you always get so excited when we get to go deep, nerdy into a personal finance topic. And I'm happy to, because I learned a lot in this journey, made my own changes to my personal finances, and it's always a good reminder. I have to say specifically, the FOMO, YOLO, and other bad reasons to invest is one of my favorite personal finance episodes. It was so fun, and to be honest, in a world where all of these crazy crypto coins, meme coins, things have only gotten wilder since that episode. So I feel very grateful that we did that episode, and it was super fun.
I also loved our student loan episode. Honestly, niche, okay? And for any of you with student loans, do not hesitate to contact me, message me on our Substack. I love helping people with their student loans. And I believe to date, we've probably helped people get about $1 million or more forgiven.
Yeah. Just
by using tips to make sure that you qualify for loan forgiveness if that's an option for you. So I love that episode. I think just the utility makes my heart sing, and it's in the weeds, and now some things have changed, but I thought it was a really helpful episode.
That was amazing too, because we got to bring on an expert and really just get deep dive dirty with it. But student loan forgiveness, Sammie alone, in helping people who have reached out to her, she's right, like millions of dollars, which is insane to think about. Insane. But if you have student loans, you also probably know what a pain in the butt it is to try to figure out. I have to say, Sammie, for me, other interviews I enjoyed, it's hard to choose, to be honest. I really loved all of them. We've gotten to speak with amazing people, our friends.
Our mentors.
Loved talking to Doc G. Loved being on the Stacking Benjamins podcast. Big fan of Nick Gray and the 2-hour cocktail party. He's just a fun guy. So it was such a fun conversation to have with him.
And he is blown up now. He was already big then, but I just hear him everywhere now.
Yes. Build a wealthy spirit. We get them while they're while they're hot. Paul Millard, I was so happy to meet him, read his book, The Pathless Path, his new book, Good Work. I got to be on his podcast. He came on ours. Those were just fun conversations and really a launch of our sabbatical era.
I loved our interview with Oz Chen for Valentine's Day last year. That was such a fun one.
So
Oz
popular.
Has a girlfriend now, so success story.
He came on this podcast and then got a girlfriend, so I don't know. 1 + 1 = 2.
I also love our interview with Debt Free Guys. They just got such good energy and such good storytellers. They have an amazing mission where they help get people out of debt, out of credit card debt in particular, and they have a very unique strategy. I recommend everybody who comes to me about credit card debt to that episode because they're excellent about it.
Yes. Shout out to Rochelle, Jess, Harris, 3 women who are really going deep in their own zone of genius, doing different interesting things, came on our podcast. Many for the first interview that they've done, and we had lovely conversations with them. And then we have to shout out Andrew Johnson, our first interview. Our second interview, Arib, Oh my gosh, my friend,
yes.
whose business, Glacier, is doing so well. Once again, coincidence.
Saving the world. I'm just seeing a pattern here.
Yeah, so Reem was actually like our test subject. We tried to do it in person. We recorded it in 5 different audio links. It took us forever to edit, and he was so patient with us, so I really appreciate that. And then Andrew Johnson, I still listen to his meditations 4 years later, and he was our first guest that we didn't know, so I really appreciate him coming on when we were a brand new podcast.
Takeaways.
This time, instead of takeaways, we are going to list the top 5, and by top 5, I mean top most played episodes of the Build a Wealthy Spirit podcast. At number 5, we have The Art of Planning a Sabbatical.
Love it. Sammie, it's funny, we didn't even tell people that I wasn't working when we started this podcast because I was kind of weird about it. But then when I started writing and so many people asked me about it, we entered our sabbatical era, which I love for us.
Number 4, The Pathless Path with Paul Millard. His story is so inspirational, and I think he is one of the forerunners of this taking a break from work idea. You know, I think now people are doing it a little bit more, and things like sabbaticals or mini retirements are more popular. But when Paul did it, I think it was just not as common.
3, deprogramming from the corporate mindset. Sleeper hit. But people love this topic, and I love it too. It's a great one if you're thinking about taking time off work, or if you have taken time off work, to basically figure out how to like relax a little bit.
It's the mental game is the hardest part. Number 2, The Great Debate, Sabbatical versus Fire.
Sammie versus Michelle. Michelle versus Sammie. Sabbatical versus fire. That was a really fun one, Sammie.
That was a fun one, and the irony is, during that time period, I was still working, and I was on the fire side of the argument.
Financial independence, retire early.
Now I'm on sabbatical. So, did sabbatical win? Who knows?
And our number 1 episode, How to Make Friends as an Adult. This was our 2nd episode ever, and it was a hit. This actually made us realize how much people were craving community, craving friendships, craving this opportunity to meet people. Also, Sammie, you didn't include it, but technically, What is Status Post Adulting? Rethink the Status Quo, our first episode ever, was actually the most popular episode. And I think it's because a lot of people go back to episode 1 and will listen. But it's funny because I forget that we were Status Post Adulting. Different jingle, very similar. But people loved that
Good
jingle.
jingle, a great jingle. There was some controversy when we switched the jingles.
Yes, those same wonderful woman who wrote our jingle. But people would sing it to us. That was like so meaningful. I was like, man, you really listened to this podcast. You memorized the jingle. So thank you all. We are so grateful that you love this podcast, that there are old and new episodes that you found so inspiring. And if you haven't listened to those episodes, go. We have a wonderful catalog of episodes that you can listen to.
Community time.
Before we say goodbye, it's our community time.
How can we do shout outs to the community, Sammie? We have had so many wonderful people who have supported us on this journey.
First of all, shout out to our local friends who are regular listeners, Paul, Harris, Karinka, Ron, Luca.
Anyone we've met and shared this podcast with in person who later let us know they listened to it, thank you. I'm always surprised, to be honest, when someone asks us about the podcast. People at the Law of Attraction meetup, people in our spiritual groups. We love being able to see you in person and talk about this.
Big shout out to Abby, who is a consistent listener. She listens and she does the exercises. She sends us her thoughts or her results from the exercises or quizzes. She is just very faithful and diligent. I have no doubt that she is going to go great places because she's just very intentional and action-oriented.
Yes, Abby may have listened to every single episode. She's definitely gotten close, so I truly think she might be our most loyal listener. Also, shout out to as many people as I can remember who have reached out or told us about the podcast. Clay, TJ, Kendall, Masha, Nate, Greg, Arul, Becky, Jennifer, Julie, Sanjana, Melissa, Nahid, Karen, Gina, Josina, Reina, Sabina, Shannon, Rochelle, our friends, Charmine, Suhaila, Alicia, Arib, Emma, Ben, Kat, Meg, Sayanga, Arjun,
Sejin, Carla,
Rimple, Viren, Delish, Esther, Robin,
Marina,
I appreciate all of you guys.
our mom,
Our moms.
and
Our
all her
mom.
friends.
Oh my gosh.
Everybody at Sutter, CPMC, San Francisco. She is our super spreader. Tamara.
Tamara, Kathy, Danisha, Nikki. We cannot start listing everybody at her workplace. We are so grateful to all of you. Anyone we have missed, obviously we can't list everyone, but we do really, really appreciate you. We love when you tell us that you're listening to the podcast. We love your feedback, but most important shout out to our mom. No one has believed in this podcast more. Our parents are people who just believe in us. They let us use us for all the best stories when we lived at home. And they
I
weren't
still
always
think,
thrilled.
I think we, since after moving out, we just didn't have as good stories.
No, nothing interesting happens to us as much
Even
as
if a radio tower falls on our house, it's just not as interesting as our parents.
oh my God. Check out Storytime. Like, we lived through some things while still podcasting. Thank you guys. If you have a message for us, you can always leave a comment at buildawealthyspirit.com. We have a great catalog of episodes of topics that we have gone deep into. We've done our hits for the last 10 to make it easy for you. So if somehow this is the first episode you're listening to, don't worry. You can go back and listen to 4 years worth of content. 4 years worth of so many fun different topics.
And most importantly, may you always put down the rule book and rethink the status quo.